It is Thursday, September 7th. It's approximately 6:02 p.m. and I call the City of Maple Plain Planning Commission meeting to order. Please stand with me and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, everyone. First, we need to adopt the agenda. Are there any additions that we need to put in or changes?
I make a motion, we adopt the agenda.
I hear a motion by Mardell. Can I get a second?
I second it.
Barb seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The ayes have it. So we need to look back all the way several months ago. Some of you were here, some were not, but we need to approve the minutes from May 4th, if you can all remember that far back.
I read through them, they look good. I make a motion that we adopt them
Okay.
or approve them.
Mardell makes a motion to adopt them.
I'll second.
Stefan seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Ayes have it again. That brings us to new business. Mark, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Honorable Chair, Commissioners. First item on the agenda tonight is a request for a variance to allow the construction of a new detached accessory building on the property located at 1839 Howard Avenue. See if there it's coming. Oh, hold on. One second. I don't want that. Hold on one second. You're gonna have to go to this side. Sorry, that for whatever reason it's not picking up what I needed to, so I'm gonna just switch it over here to this. I'm gonna switch places on here. All right, let's see if it brightens up. Can I turn the?
Yeah, dim the lights.
Mm-hmm.
Better?
Nice.
Okay.
Good.
So let me just go back here quick. Okay, so the applicant's requesting a variance at 1839 Howard Avenue for the construction of a new detached accessory structure. There's a couple of parts to the variance request, so there's actually multiple pieces to that. They're asking for an accessory structure that exceeds the maximum allowable accessory structure square footage of 1,200 square feet. The applicant is proposing to construct a detached accessory building that's 1,920 or 1,920 square feet. They're asking for an accessory structure that exceeds the maximum height of 16 feet. They're proposing a structure that would have a height of 19 feet. And then they're asking for an accessory structure with garage doors that exceed the maximum height of 8 feet. They're proposing an accessory structure with 10-foot high garage doors. So the property itself is located at the northwest end of Howard Avenue and just north of the intersection of Drake Street and Howard Avenue. It's located on the end of a cul-de-sac. The property is zoned R1 single-family residential. It's guided by the city's comprehensive plan as low-density residential. It's approximately 1.23 acres in size. This property does abut the city of Independence on both the north and west property lines. And then you can see it abuts other residential R1 properties on the east and south sides of the subject property. So the applicant approached the city about the possibility of constructing a detached accessory structure on the north side of their property behind the existing residential structure. And we talked about various components of the city's accessory structure ordinance. A couple of the things that were noted is that the applicant wanted to construct a structure that was 1,920 square feet. The maximum size permitted of a single accessory structure in the R1 zoning district is 1,200 square feet. However, I did note in the report, and it should be noted, that we allow up to 2 detached accessory structures to be constructed on a property of this size, and both of those could be 1,200 square feet. So just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about the applicant asking for 1,920. They're allowed up to 2,400 square feet based on the ordinance. Now, we would have to look at or consider the existing attached garage as a part of that overall calculation, but they're still allowed up to that 2,400 in total. And they're allowed 2 detached structures in addition to the attached garage that they have attached to the house. So we talked through some of the provisions that then apply to the city considering or granting a variance. The applicant put together a site plan that shows the proposed garage being located on the site. You can see here the location of the existing home and then the location of the proposed garage. It's noted on the plan. I'll note it just for context, but the applicant did give an easement, a drainage and utility easement, to allow some stormwater ponding, or it's really a kind of a conveyance facility in the northeast corner of their property. You can see it on the plan, and then you can see the 10-foot drainage and utility easement that encumbers the property along the east property line. But with that said, they're asking to locate that proposed garage, 40 by 48, on the backside of the existing home, with access to it from around the house. Right now, the driveway for this property, as you can see, kind of comes off the cul-de-sac and provides access into the existing garage. And then there is just enough room, depending on what they bring around, to go around this side. They do have space that they could go around this side to access the garage. The purpose of the garage is for their own personal use, to store equipment and things that they have, as well as to be a workshop for the owner. And so they put together a little bit more narrative on exactly how they were proposing to use that. The city did just do a assessment of the proposed structure as it relates to setbacks, noting that for an accessory structure, the front yard setback is 35 feet. They're not really even in, that's not a consideration for us, given that it's behind the house. It far exceeds the 35-foot setback. Side yard setback for an accessory structure is 5 feet. They're showing there the 37 feet 5 inches as a side yard setback from the closest side. And then a rear yard setback has also a 5-foot setback. They're showing 68 feet to the rear of the structure, or to the rear of the lot. And then we have another provision that a lot of people don't think about, but is an accessory structure separation from the principal structure of 20 feet, and they're showing a separation of 32 feet from the principal structure. So then, looking at the other provisions outside of just the size, the maximum square footage allotment, they're asking for an exception to the maximum height of 16 feet. So they would They're proposing an accessory structure that is 19 feet in total, so a 3-foot variance essentially is what would be required to allow that. And then they're also asking for an accessory structure that has a garage door height of 10 feet, which would require a 2-foot variance from the garage door maximum height. You can see the context that they've provided relating to the proposed structure. It does have what I would call a residential character to it versus more of a commercial or agricultural feel to it. You can see the applicant's got an overhang as well as a peaked roof and is trying to use materials that are complementary to the existing structure. The city has provisions for granting a variance. Ultimately, the city has to find that there is a hardship or practical difficulty that the applicant has in complying with applicable standards or the ordinance. The applicant put together a narrative that kind of outlined their reasoning or their thought process behind the reasons for that. We looked at a couple of considerations. One is that this subject property is unique to the city of Maple Plain in that its overall size is larger than all but about 5 lots in the city of Maple Plain. It's in that top 5. For the most part, there are a couple lots on Main Street, on the west side of Main Street that back up to either Highway 12 or the railroad there that are pretty long, skinny lots that are in that 1+ acre range. But overall, this lot is somewhat unique. The other piece of that is it backs up to another city that does have provisions that would allow larger accessory structures. So the lots that are in the City of Independence on the west and north sides do have different provisions. And you can see those lots, but they would be allowed to have accessory structures that both would be similar in height, similar in size. The location of the structure that they're proposing is to the rear of the existing house. That is something that helps to mitigate potential impacts. If you were to drive out there, and I know most of you did, it's hard to see that location from the public street, certainly, but also from all but one of the adjacent properties. For the most part, it's heavily wooded or screened in the back of that property, so another consideration that could be made. And then the city does allow, like I noted earlier on in the presentation, up to 2 1,200 square foot accessory structures with a total square footage. I misspoke. The total is 3,000. Each of the 2 buildings, if they were to provide those, is 2,400, 1,200 apiece. But the total allotment of accessory structures is 3,000 square feet, which does include the attached garage. And so, given that, what the applicant's requesting in kind of combining some of that square footage into a singular building, when you think about that versus them building 2 1,200 square foot buildings or even 1,000 and then another 1,000 square foot right next to each other, what that impact is visually and how that fits into the landscape versus what's being proposed, I guess you'd have to consider what would be more desirable in that condition, noting that they could do that without any consideration by the city other than just building permits. And then if you look at the proposed structure that the applicant presented, looking at the character of that in comparison to either their existing home or buildings in the neighborhood, it does have, I think, a different character to it than what would be considered kind of that commercial feel or commercial building. But ultimately, the city would have to make a finding that there is a hardship or a difficulty in being able to comply with the applicable standards. And then noting that the applicant is asking for essentially 3 variances within this application. A variance for a 720-foot exception to the maximum building size for a single building, a variance of 3 feet to the maximum height to allow a 19-foot structure versus 16-foot, and then a variance to the maximum garage door height of 2 feet to allow a 10-foot garage door versus an 8-foot garage door. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and also would note this is a public hearing.
With that, I would like to open up a public hearing. The time is currently 6:16 p.m. Are the applicants with us today? Come on up, introduce yourself, and say hello. Hello, why don't you tell us your name, and we know where you live.
Commissioners, council member, city planner. We are Rick and Tammy Dennison, and we do live at 1839 Howard Avenue. We've owned this property since 1994, and I appreciate you taking the time to look over our request for variance in this building that we would like to build. I did put into the packet that I submitted with the application somewhat of a narrative. Mark's done an excellent job as to going over the exact narrative and some of the items that I wanted to point out to you folks with regards to the building that we're looking at building. A little bit of history. Again, we've been at this residence for a long, long time, and I have recently considered looking at first of all, wanting a structure like this to house the equipment that we have. And the equipment, again, includes, because of the larger lot, some larger lawn mowing and maintenance equipment for the house, and then some recreational equipment, including snowmobiles, the snowmobile trailers, a collector car that I have, and whatnot. And so wanting to have those pieces of equipment and property that we own inside a structure to be able to protect it and take care of it, this is something that we were looking at building and wanted to build somewhere. We had looked at a couple of pieces of property outside of the county, and while they looked nice, it was hard for us to envision leaving this location just because of the neighborhood. And again, in the narrative where I talked about, we sit out in the front driveway and we talk with all of our neighbors and the kids that run in the cul-de-sac, and we sit on the deck in the back, and the deer run through the lot behind us, and the peace and the quiet, and I don't know how you could duplicate that somewhere. And so we felt like taking advantage of the situation that we have now with the lot, if we could build that structure onto this property, then why would we leave? So that's why we put in the size, and again, Mark has gone through very good detail with regards to what we're looking for, and a little bit why some of the variance, again, the size with the equipment and stuff that we have to store between snowmobile trailers and camper and whatnot in there, the 8-foot doors just are not accommodating to a lot of what we have, where that extra 2 feet would. And to gain that extra 2 feet in the doors, to go from 8 feet to 10 feet doors, gives us the accommodation then to bring the trailers in that we would have to want to put into there to store inside of it. So to get 10-foot doors makes 12-foot walls. 12-foot walls makes a taller peak. So the building is going to be a single story. It wouldn't have a loft or anything above it. It would just, again, that taller wall is going to accommodate those taller doors to be able to put in the items that we would want to store inside there. And again, as pointed out, having probably the ability on that property to build 2 separate buildings at 1,200 square feet would accomplish the total square footage that we would like. But it would just seem crazy to have 2 buildings of that size on the property, and I personally just would not look right. And to accommodate that small variance of about 700 square feet more than what the ordinance allows in one structure, instead of trying to do it in 2 structures, would just help us immensely.
Yeah.
What is going on, guys? And welcome to Greggles TV.
Sorry.
If you haven't,
Stand by. check.
At first, I thought that was a phone.
I don't know. I just moved an app and it just popped up. So
Dang ads.
it was a how-to video of that.
How to build a
How to build a
accessory.
structure.
How to get a variance permit passed.
There you go.
Right? Exactly. Yes. So again, that's why the height of the doors and the square footage. The other thing that I think is very important in this, and again, I think Mark's done a great job explaining the lot and the uniqueness of this lot. And I don't know if many of you have had an opportunity just to drive through our cul-de-sac, but again, this is a unique lot in a couple of different ways. One, it's off of a cul-de-sac, and typical cul-de-sac lots, a pie shape comes off of the circle in the middle. And then a few owners before us had the ability to purchase some added extra land behind this lot, which added on that what you can see is almost a rectangle behind it. And that gave us that added extra acreage, which again made this lot one of, I would say, close to top 5 in the city as far as size of a residential lot. The other thing that, again, I think is important to point out is just beyond my north property line is into the city of Independence. And those folks there could build triple the size of the building according to their ordinance on their property. So again, to have a building behind me that would look identical would not be inappropriate, given what the city of Independence would allow. So I think that is unique as far as my property goes. And then, as you can see there, and some of the trees in the lot have been taken out, but there's an excellent foliage buffer between anything else that's behind me to the north. And in fact, Mark, if I could, this is the only house that would be in close proximity to any type of view, which is some distance away, and again, heavily wooded barrier area. Even in the winter time, not much visualization towards this, and no known building at all that would go back onto this lot. And then as long as we're talking about view and how things look, again, Mark brought up the view from the neighbors. And know that we have lived here again for a long time, and one thing that we've always believed in is respecting our neighbors and getting along with them and having that neighborhood community, to know each other, to call each other when we're going on vacation, to let you know, hey, we're going to be gone, keep an eye on my stuff, and we trade that around so that communication is great. So the pictures and the plan that you got in your packet, I went to each one of the neighbors on the cul-de-sac and let them know what was happening and what I was asking for and going to see you folks tonight for, to make sure that they were okay with it. And all of them overwhelmingly, by all means, please, no problem at all with it. And in talking to the neighbors and helping them in various projects, I've been behind their house. And again, even from Annie Wyatt's house here, the view that she would have would be mostly obstructed from this. So anybody from her house, or even my neighbor on the other side, that viewpoint of this building is just, because of the angle, it is not something that they are going to be looking out the bedroom window every single day and seeing this structure. In fact, these folks will have a hard time seeing the building again because of the trees and the foliage. And Annie looks at, and she will see probably the back half of the building if she sticks her head out her crank-out window. So again, as far as visualization from the neighbors, and as you come down the street, you won't even see the building because again, if you saw on the plan, that building is looking to be about here. And the visualization from even from the street or anywhere in here is minimal at best. You would have to walk around my house to see the building. I talked about the lot size a little bit. I've talked about the neighbors. Yeah, the uniqueness of the lot. Gosh, I guess I would stand for any questions at this point. I can't think of any other points that I wanted to bring up, and answer any questions that anybody might have.
I have a couple.
Sir?
So Rick, does the, so the image of porch that was attached, does the 1,920 square feet include the porch?
It does not. It includes the enclosed portion of the structure.
Okay. Is there going to be a driveway back to this structure, or of some sort, or what are your plans for gravel or pavement or whatever to get back there?
Yes, I pictured a gravel driveway in a part of it. And when I say a part, is if you look at the picture that is up now, the right side of my house, as you follow the right side of my house back to the furthest north corner of the house, between there and my property line that goes to the right, there's a chain link fence. And ahead of that towards the street is all nicely mowed grass. I would like to leave that grass for aesthetics. And then behind that, back to the driveway, I would like to put in some sort of gravel type hard pack driveway. Not concrete, but just some sort of gravel or something like that to drive back.
All the way back to the shed?
Yes, back to the shed. It's just not something that is going to be daily accessed.
Right.
And so even the portion that I leave as green space alongside of my house is just not going to be affected that much by it to where I would be concerned about driving on the lawn. If I drove back there with a vehicle 4 times in a month, it would probably be a lot.
Okay. Were you planning on taking down any trees in the construction of this?
I have taken down some ill-affected ash trees that 2 of them were dead. 2 of them were, about 8 of them were mostly dead, and about another 6 of them had been affected. And you could see that they had ash borer.
Right. Yeah, our neighborhood's been definitely infected, especially this past year, it seems like.
So sad,
Yeah.
so sad.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the materials you're going to use? On the more illustrative picture, it looked like there was lap siding and then something else above that.
Yeah, so it's going to be a pole-style building with steel siding on the side of it in 2 different color scheme with a typical, like a wainscoting, I guess you would call, towards the bottom with one color, and then the upper color with some sort of different color and texture to it. We haven't settled exactly what the color scheme is going to be or how exactly it will match the house, because we've been actually looking at a few different buildings that have been around. There's, if you go down South Lake Shore Drive off of Perkinsville Road and go down to the bottom, goes over the hill, it makes a curve, but there's some residential area, small little, almost a cul-de-sac type down there. I'm not sure who owns it, but there's a beautiful building down there, and it's a dark blue, medium blue, 2-tone color that we loved and thought that would be awesome. And whatever it would end up being, we would end up painting the house to match the same.
The lower part would be vertical type siding or lap horizontal like we're seeing here?
It'll be a steel building.
It'll be steel.
So it'll be
but-
steel sided.
Yeah, but will the texture on the steel look like horizontal siding, or what will it look like? Because it looks like horizontal siding here.
Yeah, I don't think that it will be horizontal siding. It will be steel up to a point of probably about 4 feet, and then a transition, and then go up again. And frankly, I haven't gotten to that point with a builder to know exactly how I want it finished that way. So,
The use on this building is, there's no commercial use or anything, this is for your own usage, and
own usage, no commercial use at all.
it's intriguing, I did not realize you mentioned that you could actually do 2 12s back there. It's like, that would be horrible looking. It seems like backing up to Independence provides you something that's pretty unique. We always kind of get worried about setting like a precedence, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to talk a little bit about the uniqueness of this.
In terms of hardship, really. I mean, I think the ordinance talks about, what is the hardship that can't be avoided, right? Thus the need for the variance. I mean, it seems like you've addressed sort of mitigation for the variance in a lot of different ways, and that all looks very positive. But what's the hardship that is causing you to not be compliant with the ordinance?
For me, the hardship is just any mobile equipment that you buy nowadays is big, as is snowmobile trailers and camper that would otherwise not fit inside if I wanted to do anything with an 8-foot door. And that to me, for size-wise, the 8-foot door prohibits me to have any of that equipment inside if I wanted to clean it up in the winter time or do any type of maintenance on it inside. 8-foot doors are just so limiting with any mobile equipment today. So that would be the reason that I would want for that. And then again, secondarily, for the square footage, it would be very costly for me to build 2 buildings to meet the ordinance to maintain the square footage. So to have the variance from the square footage, I would rather not build 2 buildings. Because that
doesn't make much sense to anyone, I don't think, but.
Right, and that would be very cost
but
prohibitive.
This does represent a 60% increase over what's allowed for one structure, which is significant. Is there any flexibility on the size at all with what you're proposing?
This is the size that I would like to build, and again, to get the square footage that I would like. To get that square footage without having to have 2 separate buildings on my lot. So, building 2 1,000 square foot buildings on my lot to give me 2,000 square feet would be cost prohibitive, and just would be very odd.
Do you plan to heat it?
Yes.
I assumed.
Yes.
We don't want you to freeze your hands.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
So the ability to store campers off the street or out of your driveway or out of somewhere, and the ability to store snowmobiles, lawn equipment, hobby stuff, whatever you're doing in there, the building provides that.
Yes.
Short of that, obviously you just talked about having 2 separate buildings. That doesn't make sense to me.
The other thing too, and I don't know if we circled back to it or whatever, but again, as far as granting the variance, I'm not looking at putting this building on behind a Rambler home on Rainbow Avenue, where it would look odd in the neighborhood and it would stick out and do that. To me, the variance granted would not be precedent setting. Not everyone can walk in and say that they have a 1.25 acre lot that has about 0 view from the street or any of their neighbors to where you wouldn't see that. It would take a very unique situation like mine to come in and look for the same thing. So again, I don't think this is precedent setting. Again, because of the uniqueness of the lot, where it's going to be on the lot, and the size of the building, and also the size of my house. The house is a modified split. It's a 2-story. It's a tall house. And again, I've had, frankly, several people that have come over for the first time and walked behind the house and said, I had no clue this was all back here, meaning an 1.25 acres of a lot and a wide open lawn and whatnot. So again, as far as precedent setting, I don't think it does because of the severe uniqueness of it.
I think it will look very nice and more in proportion to your house than a small one would just look more like a shed. And this seems like it would look more in proportion.
Yeah, I think so.
I would agree. I think to build two structures to comply would look odd, would be probably an inappropriate use of resources, in my opinion, as well, to enclose a similar amount of square footage. I personally don't have an objection to it. I think
No,
that makes sense.
I do worry about precedent setting. I know probably many years ago now, we had a variance for 2 or 3 properties. Remember, Mardell?
Mhm.
I voted against that because, again, precedent. I didn't want to see Maple Plain become a city of pole barns.
But I think you also,
This is unique, and, you know, Rick's got lucky enough to have so many things going for it in terms of mitigating the impact of a larger structure. But still is a larger structure, still is, somebody, I think, in the future could come back and say, you granted this one, what was the hardship? Why not comply?
but I think you also have to look at where things are going. If you look at
Well,
a
then the
garage that was built, I don't know, 40 years ago, it would be very tiny because cars have grown, maybe more than
Yeah.
40.
Barely fits, yeah.
Well,
And our
obviously-
junk in them
That's
has
true, but I'm just looking
grown.
at it in terms of compliance with the ordinance. I mean, we all have more and more and bigger stuff. I do too. But,
I think there's also.
Kirsten, are you talking about the building that is closer to, over the bridge, that we had the
and
gentleman that wanted
There was one
to?
off of Bud as well,
Okay,
near the railroad track,
okay,
kind of back by the industrial area.
okay.
You can see it when you drive by.
Well, I personally, if you're gonna ask me, I would personally like 1 building instead of 2. I think the structure here looks awesome. I've been in your neighborhood, not recently, and I've been in your driveway, and I don't think you could see this, you know. My only concern is, if you look at meetings from way back when, there was a neighbor in your neighborhood that was a problem person, and I was wondering if that person is still in your neighborhood or things have gotten better. That, and most of us wouldn't remember that, but I do. But as for this size of structure, I don't see a problem with it. Again, I say 1 instead of 2 buildings. And if your backyard butts up to Independence and they can already go higher than this, I hope they don't, for your sake, I don't see a problem.
Appreciate that.
Do you have a problem with that neighborhood, or that neighbor still?
They moved.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, Mark remembers.
Well, Stefan certainly remembers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they didn't have permanent accessory structures,
Okay,
and temporary ones.
okay.
So Jared, are there anybody from the public that wants to, anybody else?
I mean, are there anybody else in the audience that want to speak about the matter? Hearing none, I am going to close the, what was it called? Public hearing. And it is 6:40 PM. Started it so long ago that I forgot what I called it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any further questions at all, or are we ready to take a vote?
Honorable Chair, the only thing that I would clarify, and I was brought up by Commissioner Sherson on the lean-to piece. Is that wasn't in the application as a square footage? Is that something you're requesting?
I am looking at the structure to be built as the pictures show, yes.
Okay. So that's a clarification that would need to be made, and that would be something you'd have to determine. Is that acceptable? Do you have a dimension on that? And does it run the entire length of the shed? So right now the shed's proposed to be 48 feet in length.
It would be 10 feet wide is what I'm actually going back and forth with the builder, asking 8 feet or 10 feet. 10 feet wide. And the, it would hold 48, yes, the length of the building.
So what's another?
That's 480 additional square feet onto the 1920. I don't know what the planning commission's thought is. We would need that would be considered part of the structure. We don't differentiate that piece.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
How many square feet did you say?
480,
So now we're up to 2,400,
which is right at the
and what's the,
2,400 would be the max you
Yeah.
could build under 2.
what's the size of the attached garage?
You can do up to 3,000.
You can go up to 3,000.
You can go up to
What's
3,000.
is the attached garage?
Yeah, I think
600?
you and I talked about the attached garage. What's the general dimensions of your garage? We were well within the 3,000 at the 1920.
Is it a two-car garage or how big?
Three.
It's 3.
It's a three-car.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think we calculated it to be around 700. But
I think you're right.
do you know? Is that?
That sounds close. I think that's what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
So could be that we're exceeding the 3,000 then.
Yeah, we're close. So the question would be if you'd allow him up to the 3,000, he could modify that lean-to any way he wants to meet that or not exceed that. Again, planning commission would have to decide if you're okay with that lean-to structure.
And the proposal would be that that would remain the sort of shed? Would not be enclosed in the future?
Correct. Only as a, yes, accessory.
It would also,
Need to.
Do you-
it would also cap the site out. There would be no opportunity to build another accessory structure.
Right,
Yeah.
it'd be maxed.
Yeah, I think the question would be, yeah, we wouldn't be recommending anything that would exceed the 3,000.
Yeah.
So it'd be up to 3,000, including the attached garage. We'd have to do, I don't know, I've seen your house plan, I just can't remember where I have it, so.
Okay.
But either way, I mean, it's whatever that allows for the up to 3,000.
So the total variance would be for how many square feet extra?
Well, it would be to include the lean-to that does not, does not exceed 3,000 square feet with the attached garage
Yeah. So
and
the
is no
sum-
greater
sum
than
of-
10 by 48.
So the sum of the square footage of the attached garage plus any additional,
And I think if there was a recommendation from planning commission to council, it would be that it not exceed 3,000 and that the applicant add that to the plan for council's final consideration, so that they would consider an actual number, not a up to number. Because it may very well be that he's got 720 square feet or something, and then he would have to, that could only be a 10 by 24 maybe, or something
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
Which is fairly common in terms of how these structures would be built, so.
And it appears as though this does not go all the way back on the one image I've got.
Well, the
Close.
yeah, this image, it's not on the site plan. This image shows it maybe cut off a little bit in the back, but yeah.
So the enclosed space would still remain at 19?
1920 finished space, and then there would be a lean-to.
Okay.
And we could specify that as well, that it would be 1920 enclosed.
Mhm.
would it make more sense change the wording of the variance in the area of total square footage to, how do we put it? On number 1 here, where you've got the size of single permanent structure shall not exceed 1,200 square feet, that we seek a variance on that particular item so that it's clear that what we're really sort of granting is the 3,000 total sum, which is allowed by the ordinance.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it is this, what we're asking in the variance is that to exceed the 1,200, not
Yeah.
to exceed the 3,000. The 3,000 would not be altered by an action that you took.
Right, and we could even word it such that the reason why we are, or the applicant would be seeking a variance would be to still be in compliance with the 3,000 total square foot. Does that make sense?
Right, it does.
Clear as mud.
It does.
And then the other 2 items in the variance, the height and the door height, would remain the same.
Yeah.
Is that, that bothers me less, I guess, the 8 to 10 door height and subsequent raising of the roof to accommodate that, than a 60 or maybe greater than that % increase in the total square footage beyond the 1,200.
Have you seen any, like, other cities updating their variances for the height? Because I know, I've run into it where there added language to top of like floor and then, because so you don't get an odd looking pitch just to meet your height variance that doesn't match a house or something like that.
Yeah, so, the height, I mean, the only reason the height is a question here, because we measure to the median height, median roof height, so on a pitched roof or on a gable roof. The only reason the height's in question is because he's going bigger
Yeah.
than what's allowed. A 1,200 square foot building would be able to comply and still have
That's true.
probably like a 612, maybe not a
Yeah.
1212. The door height is the other factor that we keep at that 8 foot because it's residential and we want to maintain residential. And then if somebody wants to exceed it, it is a variance, right? So that we can look at it, look at the surrounding properties, determine the use, all of those good things. But I'm seeing it, I mean,
Yeah.
I've written it both ways, but I think that this height, we're good with our own ordinance and we would just only look at variances on this. And I mean, just for context, we haven't granted a variance on accessory structure size or height in 10 years probably.
Since the ones I was referring to.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're dating back into like the 2010 maybe. So I think our ordinance is working,
Yeah.
for the most part for most people,
So it's interesting that you say the reason why we need the height, overall height, was because of the size of the structure.
Right,
Like,
it's proportional,
It's
yeah.
proportional.
Yeah.
What if that, and it seems like that porch add-on, I'll go back to where you were there,
Yeah.
that the porch, if the height is based on the height of, the eve of the porch,
Yeah.
if that maybe became more of a flatter,
I think it looks nicer with a little steeper,
Here, look at this one.
Yeah, they drop it down a little bit there, but I mean, I'm assuming that's a 412.
I think 4 or 512 probably.
Yeah, it could be a 512,
so
that could
that,
be.
you're saying at the height of the peak of the structure is not really determined at all by,
Right.
by the roof over the patio space, correct?
no.
Yeah, that peak is centered on the wall, right?
Yeah,
On this
Yeah.
elevation, and so the two,
Was, yeah, because you could flatten the roof, but it would look weird, I think, if you flatten the roof.
Right.
yeah, you could flatten it and
wouldn't
probably
want-
get real close,
Yeah.
but you're down to a 312 or something,
Yeah.
and that starts to get,
And that's gonna look more commercial.
which is your
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
That's why cities do allow a little bit of a tolerance for height. But again, I think you could go to a 612 if this was a 1,200 square foot building, so.
Yeah.
What do we think this is, a 4?
I think it's a 4 or 5.
Yeah. But it looks more correct in proportion to the building versus being flatter. Sorry, where were we at with the, kinda got sidetracked.
Stefan was going to craft that motion.
No, I'm not.
Come on, Stefan. Craft away.
I came up with the idea, someone else can.
Can you just say the wording again on how you would change that first one if you were to change it?
Well, my screen went blank here, but it was about changing the first item, which was reference to only have 1,200 square feet for one building. So it's a variance on that to be able to not have to comply with that, but in order to satisfy the 3,000 square foot total requirement. That
Okay.
was the gist of it. That's not
Yeah.
how we want to word it.
Yeah.
But,
The current request is to focus on the singular structure being a max size of 1,200 square feet. But what he's saying is all accessory buildings in consideration should not go above that 3,000 threshold.
in essence, waive that first item that says, any single structure can't be more than 2,500.
You're focusing more on the
Total, yeah.
the
Yeah.
total the total square foot.
In
Yeah,
this
because
situation.
Allowed.
because of the uniqueness here. I mean, that someone else coming in later and saying,
I
well,
gotcha.
You allowed this other applicant to exceed by 60 or maybe more percent now
Mm-hmm.
on the one structure. Why can't I do the same thing on my single structure? And I want it to be clear and documented that the reason we're considering it is because
Is
of
what
the size of the
the-
structure,
yeah.
size of the overall lot allows 3,000.
Mm-hmm. So you're almost saying that it would be in compliance because
we-
overall,
Waive the first item in order to be in compliance with the 3,000 total.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we go to one building, right, it is in
Right.
compliance.
Yeah.
That's good.
Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think I'd have to look at the wording, but a variance to allow maximum square footage of 3,000 for all accessory structures on the property by allowing a single structure to exceed 1,200 square feet, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Under this sentence.
Yeah, I think you understand the gist and the purpose behind the modification.
That would be the motion, and then obviously, as you know, with a recommendation, if it was made to the council, then we would obviously clean that up for the
Yeah,
resolution.
clean that
but-
up and then, of course, make sure that the proposal does not exceed 3,000 with the attached garage square footage.
Yeah, so that condition would actually be that the variance would allow a maximum of 3,000 square feet in accordance with the ordinance for all accessory structures on the
Yeah.
property,
Right.
including a single structure that exceeds 1,200.
And maybe that's a consideration for a future change to the ordinance, but,
Yeah, it's an interesting
yeah.
question. Well, like I said, we go back to 2010 though, before our last one, so.
Yeah, yeah.
This
Well,
is probably a good.
I know of another neighbor that might be coming soon, so.
Ah, okay.
Better have the acreage.
Better have.
Okay.
So we need a motion to approve the variance with the recommendation that it be applicable to one building being over 1,200 square feet, but encompassing the overall size of structures
Accessory buildings.
being, accessory buildings being within that 3,000
Right.
square foot limit. We also need to approve, or a motion for allowing the height to be over 16 feet. And we need a motion for the garage doors to be over 8 feet.
Do we need 3 motions, or can it be one?
It can be one motion
It
with
can
the
be one
3
motion.
actions, sure.
Okay.
Well, since I made a mess of all this, I'll make the first motion. as you
Stefan has a
described.
first motion to approve.
I'll second that motion.
Mike seconds the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Hearing none, ayes have it, 7-0.
This will go to the city council on the September 25th city council meeting.
Gotcha. You'll just have to send me the wording of the door.
Yeah, well, we will, and then I will.
If you wanna-
Times I'm like.
You didn't get it? You didn't
You
get
need to
it?
look away from it for a bit and then come back.
If you want to run it by me later too, I'm open to that.
I will craft it, Stefan, and send it to you.
Thank you, Rick and Tammy.
Thank you very much.
Have a great rest of your evening.
I heard the police are losing big right now.
That means Rick will jump on the
Yeah.
fire department team.
Yeah,
Get
right.
on
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Get right on it.
Farewell.
All right. We have another new business item to review.
Patiently waiting.
Patiently waiting.
Thank you.
Okay, Honorable Chair, Commissioners, I wanted to note a couple of things quick on the front side of this. It looks like, in talking to the applicant earlier today, it was brought to my attention that there was some things in the packet in this particular item that looked like they were applicable to an old item, and I went back and I looked because I didn't have it in my report. I had sent a draft version to Grant on Thursday last week, and then I sent him the right one, but it looks like the wrong one was in the report. With that said, most of the items, most of what was talked about in here, it was the same, but there was a couple of things I'll clarify. The one thing I wanted to note is that we had seen this property come before us before with an application for both a site plan review and a conditional use permit. And it was noted in the agenda that there was a conditional use permit also. We noticed this for a site plan review. There isn't a conditional use permit consideration. I'll talk about why that is. But mostly this application that's in front of us is kind of a variation of what we've looked at previously on that property. So the applicant, Jacob Suppley, and the owner's Outcome Limited Partnership is requesting that the city consider a site plan review to allow a change in use of the existing commercial building located on the subject property. The applicant is proposing to divide the building into 3 individual commercial spaces, which will require site improvements to be completed that will support that change in use. The property is located on the north side of State Highway 12. It's 5370 Highway 12 to be exact. It's across the highway from Marsh Avenue, and it's guided by the city's comprehensive plan as mixed use, and it's zoned by the city's zoning plan as mixed use Bud Avenue. There's an existing commercial building on the property with some kind of accessory structures located outside the building that were supportive of the previous use of that property that was being used for plastic molding and manufacturing. So this property came in front of the city previously with an application to modify just a portion of the building to support a new tenant space to be located on the very north side of the warehouse portion of the building. This building itself is comprised of about 5,000 square feet of office space and 135,000 square feet of warehouse space. And so in looking at the overall building, you can see kind of its size and how it lays out, with the office space being located on the south side of the building, and then the warehouse manufacturing space being located on the north side of the building. The property itself is approximately 13 acres in size, even though the warehouse portion of the warehouse building, it only lies on that western portion of the site, and you can see there's quite a bit of vacant land associated with the remaining property to the east. And so ultimately, when the Planning Commission reviewed the last application that came before us, that applicant withdrew their application. But one of the things that we noted was in looking at it, in looking at this building and kind of the reuse of this building as smaller tenant spaces, it would be good to have an overall plan for the entirety of the building. And so the applicant and the owner of the property have come back to the city with just that. They're asking now to definitively break that space into 3 individual tenant spaces, and they're showing site improvements that would support all 3 of those individual spaces. So the process that we use for looking at this is site plan review. We are looking at how this space ultimately could accommodate a wide array of uses that would be permitted in the mixed-use Bud Avenue zoning district. And with that particular district, there are a wide array of potential uses. Now, in just talking to people and fielding questions over the last 6 months on this particular use, I've had a broad number of different types of uses looking at and talking about how they could utilize these types of spaces. So we've had manufacturing is certainly one of those, but we've also had things that involve recreational kind of retail type businesses, and everything kind of in between that. So when we're looking at this particular site, we're looking at the mixed-use Bud Avenue and what that allows for in terms of its permitted uses, understanding the wide array that is permitted. We were trying to understand what site improvements would need to be made in order to accommodate those uses, and we are somewhat guessing at that because we don't have in front of us a specific tenant use for any one of those given spaces. So we're trying to think about this as essentially allowing for the conversion of this space, not knowing exactly who would utilize this space, but that's what we're talking about tonight is can we accommodate a wider variety of uses and allow some improvements to be made to that site such that tenants coming in to lease that property can come in and lease an improved property that already is set to go, rather than having individually to come through a site plan review process that has been found to essentially be prohibitive to a lot of smaller tenants being able to come in and go through that type of process. So the other benefit to the city in looking at it in this particular way is that we're looking at kind of the renovation of the site to accommodate the whole use of the facility, rather than just individually looking at spaces within that building on a one-off or a one at a time type basis. So with that, we did do a review of the proposed renovation of the building. The applicant provided a series of plans that shows how the space would be renovated, and so they're looking at it as having individual tenant spaces within the building. The parcel 1 or the front parcel would allow for ultimately, or the building would allow for the existing office space as well as warehouse space behind, and you can see that space would 4,200 square feet of office, 38,000 square feet of warehouse. The second space is 60,000 square feet of warehouse, and the third phase space is 34,000 square feet. The applicant would be proposing to provide an egress entrance drive that matches the existing entry to the site off of Highway 12, and also to the existing parking lot that's in front of the office space or to the south of the office space that's there. You can see the entrance drive comes into the site, and then they would have a bituminous paved area that would span the length of the building from north to south, going back along the east side of the building. With that space, they're showing the existing loading docks that exist on the building and how those fit into the site plan. And then they're showing a series of parking spaces that are located adjacent to the east face of the building, and then some additional parking spaces along the north edge of the proposed bituminous. So with that, we looked at those improvements as it relates to the paving of that space from a grading, drainage, stormwater standpoint to look at what other improvements may be necessary. It was noted that there would need to be stormwater provisions for the proposed improvements. The applicant provided a stormwater plan to the city that does show a stormwater conveyance system along the east side of the proposed parking, as well as a pond or basin area in the southeast corner of the warehouse portion of this site, directly adjacent to the driveway coming in. With that, there's 54 parking spaces that would be proposed to be installed along that portion of the building. Those parking spaces directly abut that eastern face of the building. The applicant also provided the city, upon our request, with some additional information relating to what I would call a typical elevation and then typical kind of entry door that would be provided for each of the individual spaces on the plan. You can see that the elevations that were provided, essentially that eastern elevation broken into a couple segments, shows where the loading docks are on the plan, as well as where individual entry doors would be located to be able to access each of the various spaces. And they just provided what would be kind of that typical door detail, just a kind of double door. Entry doors, that's something that we had asked for kind of in the last go around to try to understand how that would be accommodated. The applicant also looked at, and we talked about emergency vehicle and apparatus movement through the site, as well as truck movement that coming through that parking lot site. The applicant provided and shows a semi-truck and how it can make a turn within that parking area. That's one of the reasons that we see such a wide bituminous area in front of the building, or to the east side of the building, would be to accommodate the truck moving, but they also provided a fire apparatus turning movement, and you can see how fire apparatus would be able to make the turn coming into the site and turning around while still maintaining the parking that's up against the building wall. So we looked at that. We looked at the stormwater grading drainage, and I think with some minor revisions and addressing certain comments that were made by the city engineer relating to that, the applicant can accommodate those the requests and meet the standards for the various provisions relating to that. We looked at also then the parking associated with a standard kind of manufacturing warehousing building, and then also the office. We noted in the report the number of spaces that were required based on this being just a manufacturing warehouse building. I would note that we do have other types of warehouse and parking regulations noted in the ordinance, and there is again wide range of what could be parking requirements for a building of this nature, depending on the type of use that comes forward and ultimately occupies the space. With that said, the applicant, to accommodate just the office use of the property and then the just gross square footage, if it were 100% manufacturing warehouse, not automated, but just manufacturing warehouse, you would have up to 330 parking spaces required on top of the 17. Now, with that said, we typically look at case-by-case situations for parking. We try to understand employees, we try to understand use, and we try to understand kind of similar use and what parking demands those uses place on on any given business, and then we try to accommodate that with adequate parking on the site. With that said, the applicant has 27 spaces that are located in the existing parking lot. That's the office parking lot out in front of the building on the south side. And then they're proposing 54 surface parking spaces along the east face of the building for a total of 81 parking spaces. In looking at that and understanding just how big this space really is, I don't know that that provides adequate parking for all uses that the city could see come into those individual tenant spaces. There are certainly scenarios where that would be adequate, depending on the type of users that came into the building. With that said, one of the things that I would look at is just adding some additional parking spaces either to the eastern edge or reconfiguring how the drive aisle comes in and those spaces are presented such that you could still have truck maneuvering to each of the loading docks, but you would be able to add some spaces that would be not in conflict with the truck movement associated with that site, but essentially developing a proof of parking that would allow for additional parking spaces to be developed should any one of the particular tenant spaces demand for additional parking. And again, that's based on the type of use that would go in. This is somewhat unique because our mixed-use Bud Avenue has such a wide array of permitted uses, including manufacturing warehouse or light manufacturing warehouse as a permitted use. And because this building is so large, it could accommodate a wide array of uses. This is different in a lot of respects to a multi-tenant either office building or a multi-tenant retail building, where by and large the types of users and the demand that they place on a facility are consistent or very much more standard and much more identifiable. But with that said, even some of our multi-tenant retail buildings have limitations on certain types of uses that are required to come back in and proof parking. We do this a lot with restaurants. So if we have a multi-tenant building and there's a change in use from, say, like a retail or something similar to that to a restaurant, we have a lot of provisions in some of our newer developments where we require restaurants to have to come back in to prove parking because they just have such a unique or different demand on parking. So the idea of having kind of this proof of parking isn't something that's new. I think if you look at the site, they have 13 acres. They certainly have the room to be able to add some additional spaces and still accommodate truck movement. If, for example, a tenant space, either the middle or north side would come in and want to use without the truck loading docks, it wouldn't be light manufacturing, light warehousing, and that need for the truck turning goes away, then that obviously that area could be utilized for parking in some manner, and you could see how that could be accommodated. But with that said, looking at the idea that we would consider this with the idea that we'd add some additional parking. The other piece of this that we looked at, architectural guidelines, we talked about this with the last request. The owner is not intending to make major modifications to the exterior. I do think if we had an individual tenant that came in, there's the possibility that they would want to modify things like that entrance doors or an awning or something like that, depending on how their particular business operates and how they would intend on using that space. I think that's something that the city could deal with or work with kind of on an individual level. But we do have architectural guidelines associated with the mixed-use Bud Avenue. We talked about them somewhat previously in that this is a modification to an existing building, not a new building. And so we try to look at what does that mean and apply some level of reasonable, kind of lens to how we consider renovations to the building and what requirements we make. We do look at the parking lot lighting. The applicant did provide the city with a photometric plan. We noted that they had some lights shown on the building to light the parking facilities, and that those were, while they were a cutoff type style, they were shown to be tilted at an angle. And so we asked them to revise that to show those at a 90-degree cutoff. In looking at that overall plan, the building lighting does provide lighting for the parking spaces that would be up against the building. If parking spaces were going to be located, say on the far east side of the parking area for like a proof of concept type of future type parking, I think you would end up needing some light poles as well to provide adequate lighting to those portions of the site. But under the current plan, without having to build that parking, I think you could accommodate that with the building lighting, noting that they would have to comply with that cutoff fixture. But even in looking at that, they have plenty of room on that site to be able to reduce the lighting down to the thresholds noted on the property without causing glare or light spill across the property or onto adjacent properties. We did get also a landscape plan that was included in the packet for this site. The landscaping that's shown is really concentrated along the south entrance to the site, and then the existing parking spaces serving the office portion of the building. So the applicant did provide screening along the edge of the existing bituminous parking stalls that border Highway 12, and they added some additional decorative landscaping on both sides of the entrance driveway. They show a couple of additional shade trees that would be essentially carved out of an area now that is both gravel and grass. In the last plan that we had considered, we did talk about screening along the east side of the proposed parking areas that were associated with that north tenant space. But generally, I'd look for feedback from Planning Commission relating to landscaping. I noted in my report that something in the neighborhood of a tree every 30 to 40 linear feet along that east parking lot would provide a nice break along there, and also set this site up to be either split or another use to come in at some point in the future. And then it would also add some shade and some landscaping back into that large bituminous parking area that is being proposed. Outside of that, in looking at this property, the things that we noted, it is a mixed-use district with an adjacent industrial district located to the north and to the west. We do have a variation of guidance for that Bud Avenue mixed-use district, which could include multifamily residential, as well as retail, as well as a whole series of other types of kind of general business, office, medical uses. This is a building that's large, in place, and the idea that trying to break it into smaller tenant spaces, I think, is probably more compatible with the mixed-use Bud Avenue district than a large singular facility. I do think that based on some of the tenants that we've had, or potential tenants, I should say, reach out to the city, it seems like the idea that smaller or having smaller spaces is desirable and more obtainable for a wider variety of businesses. The couple of other pieces that I noted in the report, there would be no outdoor storage proposed and or allowed as a part of our consideration for site plan review. If somebody were to come back and ask for outdoor storage, I think we would have to consider it under conditional use. And then we don't know what the property to the east of this property is ultimately going to develop as. I do keep that in mind. I just want people to note this is the largest vacant piece of property that we have in the city, even after you split this off. So there are a lot of potential uses that adjacent property could be used for and or could accommodate. The city council had talked about that property on several different occasions in the past, And their general direction was we want to maintain that property for something compatible wholly with the mixed use Bud Avenue vision and kind of a higher and better use than just kind of storage or just open warehouse. But we don't know what that would be. The applicant has talked about, but no application's been made for subdividing or potentially subdividing this portion of the property from the remaining vacant portion of the property. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on the application or the request. The applicants are here as well.
And I would like to open a public hearing starting at 7:21 p.m. If the applicant is here and would like to introduce themselves and give us some words, feel free. What's your name and where you live?
Zach Weber. I work for Laux, which is the civil engineering and landscaping firm for this project. Our office is located at 7200 Hemlock Lane North, Suite 300, Maple Grove, Minnesota, 55369. I'm basically here to field any technical questions you have on any of the engineering, any of the site plan questions you might have. I know today it's an existing gravel parking lot, so we're trying to do some improvements to it. The only thing is, we got the chicken and the egg scenario. He doesn't have tenants to fill the space, so he's trying to improve it to get more tenants into his building. So that's kind of the reason we don't really have direction on, what the end use is going to be. But hopefully this will spark some conversation and get some more tenants in the building.
I have a question for you on the site plan. I see a swale in there that's pretty shallow on the far east side. Is that paved or is that grass? Or
It'll
what is
be
it?
grass. Yep. There's not a lot of elevation change out here, so we were very limited to what we could do. We have no storm sewer to tie into, so we're sheet draining it all across the bituminous into a swale that brings it down to the south to that basin. It's an infiltration basin, so it's supposed to drain dry in 48 hours, and then the overflow would go into the ditch, into the Highway 12 ditch.
Okay. You're right, it is pretty flat. It's 0.4%.
Correct.
Mhm.
And then how do looks like there's new ramps for loading, for the loading dock areas that are below
Correct.
the grade
They'll be,
as well?
yep.
How
They're
those
looking at
drain?
recessed docks. They'll need to be, there's a trench drain, it'll need to be pumped.
Oh. To where?
It'll be pumped probably to the basin.
There were some bins shown on the aerial. Are they gone or will they be gone?
They, I've been told that they are gone.
I remember I drove by there, I couldn't remember if I saw those or not. I went to look.
Are they on the west side or?
Yeah, if you look at the existing,
They're like right here.
Yeah.
Weren't they supposed to move to the other building?
they are, and they will be moved. It's noted on the plan,
Yeah.
there's these bins right here that are going to be removed in the middle of the 3 silos.
And all the other kind of clutter on the site was related to the tenant moving
Correct.
into, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see the restoration that would occur on that site with the bituminous proposed and then the removal of the gravel.
Is there any kind of environmental or like water review that has to be done with pumping out of a recessed ramp? Is there anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it was a comment that was noted, I think, by our engineer, but they asked for more information on the pumping of that. That's something we'd look at. But yeah, if vehicles are going to be stored, it could trigger certain traps that would need to be installed. But that we haven't gotten that far on that detail yet. So it's a good question, though.
Yeah, and how that works in the wintertime as well.
And that was one of the comments I think that we made.
far as the turning movements on site, is there, if there's trucks, like 2 trucks at a dock, can the northern truck get out of the dock, or would they have to wait for a?
They would have to wait, I believe. I don't know if we have that truck turning movement.
So I guess depending on the kind of chicken and egg, if they needed to widen the site or side or the paved area, like if there's 3 trucks there, if one of the northern 2 needed to leave, or the middle one, it wouldn't be able to until the southernmost one would.
Yeah, it would be at the same condition, all 3 docks, is that
Yeah.
they'd have to coordinate truck movement in and out because of that limitation.
Yeah.
But again, when looking at it, there's a drainage swale and grass, so they're not gonna be able to kind of force that.
Yeah, they would, like, the only like downside to that swale is like it limits, unless you would have to put some kind of culvert or something in, or
Right.
yeah,
One
re-engineer
of the
it.
things that we had talked about before from the former one is if we have, it would be wonderful to get all 3 spaces used with them. But all those people trying to get out on Highway 12, remember talking about that?
Yeah, the current site and the current building, the way that it was set up, there were many more employees in that building at one point. Breaking this down into 3 spaces doesn't really increase that necessarily. It could, depending on the types of uses in there, but, in looking at the building, we're somewhat saying we're okay. We're okay with the idea that we're gonna keep it. And so we're just trying to figure out how to make it better. But, Highway 12 does have the ability to accommodate. Now, at some point, Highway 12 could have a plan that shows, maybe limits that access to a right in, right out or something else. That's a whole nother
Okay.
kind of conversation. For the time being, it's allowed to come out onto that site, but definitely something that would be a consideration. Now, we've in some of the other planning that we looked at with this overall property, we talked about, is there a need to connect to Pioneer Creek or out to Bud somehow so that we could get kind of a secondary break point or get people out to a light. But we haven't looked at the rest of the site yet, so.
Okay.
Actually, a right in, right out would be the easiest way
Yeah.
to go down to the roundabout.
Yeah.
Did you consider paving that swale? Okay, sorry, get back to the swale again, but I just see, the tightness of the turning movements of the trucks, I see probably there's gonna be a lot of,
The swale might be a limitation.
well,
or
I can
just
see
a-
trucks driving off the pavement
Right.
onto the swale, and it's less than 0.5%. That's barely draining. Normally for grass, you wanna be at 2%, so it's pretty minimal. Is there maybe be a better option to pave that swale to make sure that it does flow?
Yeah, we can look into it. It hasn't been looked at yet. But I know grass swales provide better
Infiltration.
treatment to the stormwater, which is what
Yeah.
it's intended to do, is, clean it as it goes down to the infiltration basin.
That's,
If you pave it, you wouldn't get any of that.
I'm just worrying about maintenance of it as big trucks drive over it, they make a rut, and now it doesn't flow at all, and you've got damming going on and, big puddles. So I guess I would just ask if you consider that as an option. Other questions I had were pertaining to, back to the parking. Mark, you mentioned proof of parking, but you were proposing that to happen later in the event that there's an actual tenant that has a proposal? Or would it be best to sort of plan for the worst-case scenario so we know how it would look in the event that a tenant came in that had a high demand for parking?
Yeah, I think that we should plan for it. So what I had asked is, or I'm recommending that if we were to consider a condition to recommend approval, that the applicant have to provide an updated site plan showing additional spaces. My recommendation would be to show an additional maybe 40 parking spaces. I think if we were to get to that 120 threshold, which then breaks down to, about 40 spaces per segment, knowing that the office, kind of this additional little thing on the front, but I think that gives us some comfort level that then we could do it. The only question would be exactly the configuration, so I do think there's a couple of different ways that I looked at doing it without really changing that footprint that's being proposed. And that just goes back to, is there a way to do that and kind of define a singular truck turnaround area that would allow all the trucks to kind of make a turnaround in the site and get into the loading docks versus having kind of three areas if you look at. And but again, I don't know that I think you could do that and then not change the footprint. So, if we go down to the.
Well, or consider expanding the paved area in the event that additional parking is needed, expand to the east.
Yeah.
In which case, you're paving through your grass swale now, but.
Yeah, and so that would be, to me, that would be the modification, is potentially that you could add some spaces onto that east side and add, 18 feet to accommodate additional spaces. And but I also think you could have kind of that singular turnaround movement in the middle, or the singular turnaround movement to be here, where trucks, legitimately could come in, make the turn, and then back into the loading docks. I don't know that you have to have trucks being able to turn around in all parts of that parking lot, but there's plenty of room on this site to add out those spaces. I just want them shown on the final version of what we adopt, so that we could know what that looks like, adjust the swale and or landscaping to accommodate now, so that we don't have to do it later.
Right. That was my thinking as well, is to get that planned out now, so.
If you look at what, is being proposed, we're talking about 120 feet across that. So if you think about that space, I mean, that's a significant bituminous area. I would like to figure out a way to just fit them within the existing asphalt rather than adding more, because it's starting to become a really big paved area.
Yeah, for sure.
That's gonna start to work against us.
And I think you're right on in terms of the interplay between the truck turning and the parking is the key thing, and if you can figure out that puzzle.
And again, I'm talking, 40 maybe it's a little bit less, but I think if we had a proof that showed how we could get additional spaces so that we understand it and that we have planned for it, that gives us the ability to then accommodate this kind of open renovation without having to know each individual users. The other thing is, users can come and go, right? So we could get a user in day one, and then year 5 they move and we get a new user, and that has a demand on parking that we need to be able to accommodate.
Some new users might need a lot of parking, some not very much, so maybe you could share, the party that needs more parking could maybe, use more than their share, if you will.
Right.
On the overall site.
And if you look at the recommendations, and I don't have I would have to work with the applicant and the city attorney to draft the language on that condition, but we'd have to have some process for a check on tenant changes to accommodate parking, just given these spaces and then that broad use. But I think we've done that before. We've done it on multi-tenant buildings, we've done it on multi-tenant office, we've done it on multi-tenant retail. And I think that's something here, rather than overbuild, we could build something that we think accommodates and then have the ability to expand if needed.
And maybe the ability to review administratively?
That's what I'm suggesting the condition would be, that it would be an administrative review and kind of a proof. And then we'd have a determination. Now, if somebody didn't like the determination, they could always come back to the city to have the city weigh in on that, but.
Is there a sign package part of this at all?
No, we asked if there would be, and they said they didn't have one that they were going to submit with this application.
Let's go without,
So that would come back.
without any tenants, it's kind of hard to
Right.
Yeah.
know what signage you're gonna need,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I could see where, like you're saying, just putting in a few, maybe horizontal parking, you could squeeze some parking in there pretty easy, but it's trying to be different.
Yeah, I think you could easily show parking here and still accommodate trucks. I mean, the other thing with proof of parking and trucks, I mean, let's say for an example, the North Bay has a user that comes in that has a higher parking demand. They may not need truck loading docks, right? I would say the truck loading docks I would find more often associated with a lesser intense use, something with manufacturing, warehousing, right? That probably parks differently than if somebody came in with, I mean, the one that I talked to a ton over the last couple months was a pickleball club, you know, and so that would be a retail, public facing club with food and drink and lots of courts, and so that one has a different demand. I mean, but that space clearly accommodates that, right?
So would the plan be to put the recessed docks in day one, or is that?
Yeah, the intent that I understand is to put them in day one.
I think so, I guess.
But
So it's like if
If you're gonna pave it.
Yeah.
Might as well do it then.
You cut them out,
Yeah, drainage pumps.
and with the docks, you're more likely gonna attract businesses that want that type of use, right? Which is the warehouse manufacturing end of that, or but that's not to say, I mean, we see tons of uses in warehouse type. I mean, these buildings with high ceilings and clear spans are very
Yeah.
attractive, right? I mean, breweries love them.
Trampoline centers.
Yeah, trampoline. the pickleball is the hottest
Pickleball,
thing
yeah.
going now, right? We're seeing those all over. So
Well, I think the landscape plan looks adequate. You know, you're screening the parking. I support the idea of additional trees on the east that you mentioned. I'm curious to know what might happen in the future on the east side. I know we had, several years ago, we had an apartment complex come in for a variance or site plan review. Is that no longer?
yeah,
gonna happen?
the Bud Avenue apartment concept plan is they're looking to submit a preliminary development plan for a
Okay.
phase one of the apartment building. So I
Okay.
anticipate that coming in. I've been talking to their architect.
And that's right adjacent to this, right?
Well, it's over off of Bud, but yeah, it's adjacent to. Whoops, apologize.
Oh, you meant in the old downtown area. I
No.
But it is. It's this space right here. If you
Yeah,
look at my
that
cursor.
So yeah, like I think a few trees along there would kind of be nice to, even if they're
Yeah,
placed in front of where the wall pack, I mean, it's not
just
I know
a
they're
screen.
cutouts, but just,
That's why my recommendation would just be to run a row of trees to kind of
Yeah.
give that long term, just some buffer. We're not screening it,
Yeah.
right? But just some, and that's a huge parking area, so it's a big bituminous. I think some trees along there to shade it would be a good thing. It's not a lot. We're not asking for, I mean, it's not that many. At the end of the day, I didn't do the math on the 30 or 40 foot spacing, but I mean, I think that would be reasonable. We did have that in the north plan when we were
Yeah.
just looking at that. We had probably about enough trees to do it the
yeah,
whole way
if
down.
we spread them out.
If we had spread them out, yeah.
How do we feel about the architectural guidelines applying here?
I think Mark put it nicely of coming to that middle ground. It's an existing structure.
Yeah.
We don't want to force them to like demolish the whole thing and start over. But we do want to consider those design guidelines, just to kind of start pulling in that feel. So that was one of the things that I was thinking of. We also want to wait for tenants though too, because depending on the tenant, you don't want to do something that then the tenant's like, well, I don't want this, so.
There's currently no tenant for the south warehouse at all? So
It's been vacated now.
The lower, the single-story structure, right?
Yeah, I mean, in looking, there is some visibility to that site, but not tons of visibility. I do think adding landscaping out by the road and then doing a full pavement and then getting rid of all the gravel that's not used would be it's going to be a major change from a feel.
Yep.
Yeah, it's gonna clean it up a lot.
The applicant did do some roof work and did do some paint work on the site. With the loading dock, there are some loading docks there, but with the updated loading docks coming in, and then ultimately they're gonna have to cut potentially man doors or person doors or open, into the site to accommodate any kind of a use. I would think an individual tenant would want something more than that, right? Like an awning.
Yeah.
We could recommend that they include an awning in those doors or something like that. I think that we see that a ton in the warehouse renovation space.
Certain climate, have a awning over the door is nice in the winter, or
Yeah.
summer when it's raining,
And the area off to the east of the new pavement is
It's all going to be restored to grass.
the part that is removed, but beyond that, I see where it says green area, right? Is that, I guess I haven't been back
If you
there, but.
if you look at the aerial, you can see that they're going to be removing that gravel to the east of the driveway coming in. So then they'll put in that drainage swale, and then, if we recommend the landscaping, then the rest would be just lawn area.
Okay, which it is now?
Yes.
except for like,
So
yeah,
then-
where the gravel and all the
Okay.
kind of junk is laying out there in the photo right now.
Yeah, there was some gravel installed right behind the car dealership last year, and that got taken back out. They did that without the permit, but, so that's gone. But what they're proposing is the bituminous drive, pave it all the way back, 120 feet away from the building, then the drainage swale, then grass.
I guess it'll look a lot nicer.
Yes.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's tough, because you gotta sort of wait for the chicken to show up, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been waiting, and that was part of our recommendation, was come back with a whole,
Yeah.
show the whole thing. And so now the applicant, they're not proposing this in phases. This is a 100% update. They would do all the improvements up front and get it prepped for, being able to then have tenants lease.
Sort of an odd question, yeah. I assume the structural soundness of the entire building is in good shape, roof, all that kind of stuff, or?
I think there was some roof work that was done. I know our fire inspector's been in there. They would obviously have to work with them. But building, any kind of finish or build out would be subject to plans and, building permits and all of that. I assume there would be some build out of those spaces. I mean, the one tenant that came forward before with their plans had a full kind of build out plan for that space, including some demising walls and some other things, so.
And I know that there's a lot to consider with those below grade loading docks. There can be a lot to that. Fuel, debris, time of year, all those kinds of things. Obviously not necessarily a preferred method, but in this case, it sounds like that's what it's gonna be.
Yeah, it's gonna be pretty common though for a recessed loading dock to have some kind
I
of
know
tree.
that I did a lot of stuff for landscape for Steve out in Delano. Got just from digging the snow out of it. I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
Just a
Yeah.
mess.
Unfortunately, they're trying to match the finished floor elevation inside the building.
Yeah,
So an
no, I get
elevated
it.
dock wouldn't work because the loading docks right now are in the middle section, and those are elevated, which would be preferred, but I think inside the building, the floor elevation must accommodate those loading docks, whereas the new areas where the loading docks are gonna be in, the finished floor is 4 feet lower, so we gotta go down in the
What
ground.
size truck is the turnaround designed for?
A WB 67, which is a 53-foot trailer.
So full?
Yes.
trailer, okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, before we're done, Jake's got a couple more questions or comments on parking for you guys. So
Hey folks, Jake Softly, Larkin Hoffman, I'm the applicant on the application. Some of the questions that have popped up, I have answers to, and I can help maybe shed a little more light on it. But I think Zach did a great job talking about all the technical aspects of the building and the site plan. When we look at the 3 spaces getting to the structure, it is naturally 3 spaces right now. The owner has done restoration of the roof, has installed the new lighting, has upgraded the heating, the HVAC system, the heating elements in the building, has renovated and upgraded the fire suppression systems inside the building. In fact, I have a few photos that I can pass around to you all in case you want to see what the inside of this sparkling clean warehouse facility looks like. We currently have 1 user, and they use 12 vehicles per day on average, with a max of 15 people. And so when we get into the parking discussion, I can share that the other 2 tenants that we have fairly seriously interested in the project right now are looking at 1 vehicle per day, maybe a max of 3, and then 7 to 15. And so when we look at users in the industrial and warehousing space. I'm sorry, what was it?
One vehicle you're referring to a private?
Yeah, when I'm talking about the parking requirements for like a private vehicle for an employee to be on site. And so we really see an enormous reduction in the manpower involved with, commercial, business, industrial uses. I know you've spoken a little bit about the worst case scenario, and I agree if we had a Home Depot come in here, it'd be all chaos breaking loose, right? But that would trigger a totally different site plan. They would come in and they would build a totally new building and they would reorient the whole parking area. I think when I look through the permitted use table for the MUB district, most of those, if not all of those worst case scenarios would construct a new building, and we'd be looking at a new site plan requirement for that specific user. There are some, like say a pickleball facility, that would be really exciting to bring in. What I would say there is a lot of these uses are counter-cyclical to the business and the industrial use that goes on currently. So you'd have evening and weekend use for those parking spaces. And on site with the proposed plan, we can show 81 spaces. And while we don't have a proof of concept ready today, if you transpose those spaces on the west side of the parking area onto the east side, well, we have 42 parking spaces, I think, on the west side. And that's with loading docks and entry doors. And so we can probably get 42 parking spaces on the east side, which gets us to our 120 number. The other thing to consider is that the farther east we have to expand the bituminous restricts the future use of that open green space area. And that, when we think about the greater goal of the district, that could be a problem with developing that eastern portion in a manner that's consistent with what the vision is. So take a minute and focus on my photos here so you can see the inside of the warehouse building.
I guess my takeaway from the parking was like, not necessarily expanding it, but showing how if the use changed in that space didn't need a truck turning, how you could fit more, like stripe it differently to fit the parking load into your existing plan. Is that what?
Yeah, that's what I think is.
Yeah,
and I agree with
Yeah.
Jake's assessment with it, which is it's essentially what I said is if you just took the eastern spaces and flipped them over, I think you could do that without adding parking. Pavement, and we have 120 feet, that's plenty to have multiple rows, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's.
If you can pass that around the row. I just made quick notes on my version of the site plan with the parking plan on there to show, if I were to draw parallel lines consistent with the parking shown on the east side, that.
And that's all
The
really
eastern
that I
side,
was.
we can
recommending is that we have that proof plan that's just kind of the master plan that shows how a space could be converted into parking. Not that we would do it day one,
No.
not that we would require it, but that it could be without anything really more than striping.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it
Yeah.
could be accomplished.
Yeah, especially if you have 120 feet width there.
Yeah,
That's enormous.
It's big.
Plenty of room, as long as it works with whatever's left over as far as truck turning needs.
Right.
Are concerned.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe, yeah, I mean, talk to the engineer about it, but I mean, 20 feet on each side leaves, what, 80 feet in the middle for, is that enough for a truck turning?
Yeah.
Not-
Yeah.
Seems like a lot, but I don't know, I'd have to look at it.
Yeah.
And maybe if the
Should've
uses
been an
change, you don't.
engineer, you
know,
could've done
Yeah,
it.
you're not gonna have a
Maybe,
truck and
maybe you
park.
don't need to have truck turning if uses change.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the other piece, right? That's why that kind of administrative case by case to say,
Yeah.
hey, I've got a business, you know, I'm a brewery, I want to come in, I don't need the loading dock, we
Yeah.
close that off, can we,
Yeah.
the rest of that in accordance with the plan, and then it's pretty simple.
So that would be, you know, a recommendation.
I think you could, given that we're talking about, I mean, I feel comfortable with it only because it's not a footprint change.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
Right.
it's a striping change, so I think it's just a graphic that we generate between now and the city council meeting.
Yeah.
That shows that, and I
What do you
think
call it, a ghost plan? Is that what I've heard before?
it's a ghost, but I call it a proof of parking,
Yeah.
but,
That sounds better.
yeah.
Sure, and we're happy to do that. I mean, you have to, you all know your city far better than I do, but I've been looking at maps of this site. And what I'm stuck with is realizing that if we don't have enough parking for our users, we don't have overflow. So you have this event outside the building today. If there's overflow, we can park on city streets and we can all get by. But this site does not have additional access. And so it's really important for us to make sure that our proposal has enough parking for the tenants that we envision. And I wouldn't be here today with the plan we have if I didn't think that was enough. And we're more than happy to provide that proof of parking concept to the city council. Would love to have that as a recommendation. It's not a problem. But I know, again, with recessed loading docks, that's another thing. If that's a feature that doesn't work, that's a big problem for us. That's a big problem for our tenants. But you know, the owner is going to be very upset about that feature not working, and we'll get that fixed. So. Are there any other questions about the application or any other conditions of approval you'd like to discuss while I'm up here to give comment?
Are there any other people in the public that would like to voice any concerns? Step right up.
In closing, I should say I haven't heard anything here that we would object to in terms of conditions. You know, the landscaping is just fine, and the proof of concept is fine, and the administrative approval of proof of concept parking is just fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. State your name and where you live.
My name is Barry Shear, and I'm representing Rebel Automotive, which is to the east.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. So you're talking about the basin, for the drainage. You're going to ensure that that doesn't flood our area where on the east side. When you get a lot of rain still in the back of that, there's a lot of water back there. You're going to ensure that it doesn't come into the Rebel property. I'm just bringing that up when you talk about your swales and talk about trucks going through and all that. Just ensuring that. That's key to us, for where we park and things like that. It was also brought up about the amount of increased traffic on 12. Someone brought that up earlier. Are you doing a DOT study on 12? Because it's brutal right now going back and, if you want to take a right turn, left turn. I mean, there's a lot of traffic. With the increased volume that they're talking about, you can't go back and say, well, it's set up for this right now. But if you look at traffic patterns change and where people are living, it's tough right now. So is the DOT going to allow it? With your turn lanes and this and that, with all the increase, you got trucks, cars, even people playing pickleball, trying to get in and out. You don't want anybody getting accidents and things like that. Just bringing that up because it was brought up earlier. Those are my only things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else out in the public that wants to speak? Seeing none, I'm closing the public hearing at 7:56 p.m. Okay. Anybody have any other comments or thoughts or questions?
Looks like they've done a good job with what they had to work with.
Yeah, and it kind of piggybacks off of what we were talking about related to the tenant that was trying to move in. We need space for trucks, we need space for parking, things of that nature, and they weren't planning to do any
I guess
pavement and whatnot, so.
add that with the site plan and the restoration of the gravel area, there's, I'm not, is there grading shown there to show that that's gonna be also like draining in the property and not outside the property, I guess? Or that we're not.
It's,
changing
they
the
don't,
grade.
yeah, they're not changing grade, they're not proposing a grade, I mean, they just talk about a general restoration.
Yeah.
We would want to make sure that it was restored to not obviously negatively drain, but I mean,
Yeah.
typically we would associate removal of gravel, restoration of grass to be positive and reduce kind of that runoff.
Yeah.
Well,
But I'm saying just so when they do that, that it doesn't change the grade, that it starts pushing water.
Sure.
In a way it's not flowing today.
Yeah.
Well, I would probably defer to the engineer. I mean, we're
Yeah.
converting
Yeah.
the
Yeah, it goes.
gravel and some grass area to pavement. It's impervious. It's gonna not drain it, not gonna, absorb into the ground, right? It's gonna go to that swale and eventually
Yeah.
to the basin. The swale getting there is shallow, and as I mentioned, there,
Yeah.
concerns about
Yeah.
it potentially not being well maintained and not flowing.
You can see that grade's higher too, adjacent, so as long as that's maintained, it shows that they're
Yeah.
draining it back to that swale, that grass area.
Yeah.
I would maybe ask the gentleman from Locks to come back and talk to the engineering of that pond and the capacity for it.
Yeah, so we look at three critical storm events, the 2, the 10, and the 100-year storm event. And that's based off of the National Oceanic, I don't remember what it is, but NOAA. And they give out what those 24-hour storms are. So all of our basins are designed with those storms in mind. And we match rate control, so what comes off at the site currently, we have to match, so existing to proposed. Then we have to do some water quality and some water volume stuff, which is based off your city ordinance along with the Sarah Pioneer Creek Watershed District. So as the basin is designed today, it's not designed to flood in the 100-year event, which is 7.3 inches in 24 hours. It'll overflow into the ditch, and then the ditch will take it as it does today.
Okay.
So.
Yes, to make sure that.
Yeah, I think it addresses the gentleman's concerns
Mhm.
about
Yeah.
potential for flooding next door,
Mhm.
which is great.
Right, and then the gravel will get replaced with seed, and we're not proposing to change the drainage pattern, so it will most likely come back to our pond, because that's the high area of the site.
Mhm. Drainage is a very sensitive subject in Maple Plain.
Yeah, it is everywhere. So.
Our soil doesn't really drain.
No.
We got other problems if we have 7 inches of rain coming in 24
Yeah.
hours.
Thank you.
Yep.
I would also note just on Highway 12, just from a traffic standpoint, right now there is a left turn lane, right?
Yeah.
There's a center, what I call the suicide lane in the middle, and then there is a shoulder that acts as a right turn lane the entire length of that. So I don't know that we'd have a different improvement that we would make, ultimately for that. and this site's existing, that access is existing, and again, I don't know that what's being proposed intensifies the
Yeah.
access. We're not changing the square footage, we're modifying it, but.
Okay. Well, I'll make a motion to approve or recommend to the council let's see here, how was this worded? Hang on. You had a draft recommendation in here, did you?
I
Mark?
did, and it was, so I included hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have 5 conditions. Prior to city council, applicant revised plans to accommodate all known comments. Applicant shall comply with applicable stormwater requirements. Building improvements and site plans shall be made in accordance with the approved set of plans, and then the city shall regulate the individual tenant spaces based on the adoption of that proof of parking or master plan. If you were to add the 2 conditions that we discussed, which was that they need to provide a revised proof of parking concept,
Yes.
and that they add the additional landscaping along the east perimeter line, I think those would be the additions that we talked about.
I think that's correct, and so I'll make that motion as you described it, with the addition of the proof of parking plan and additional trees along the east side of the pavement.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
This will also go to September 25th, city council meeting.
Ayes have it 7-0. Scroll all the way back up. That was all of the new business that we need to talk about. Are there any other commission reports or anything else we wanted to discuss?
Can we get a new, can our new person talk a little bit so we know?
Sure.
So you guys?
Thank you.
Thank you. What was your name again?
You're on.
I don't remember what my name is. Jacob Colander.
Jacob, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did that?
I come from the city of Vesta, Minnesota, my hometown. And the last city that I worked for was the city of Spicer on Green Lake, just north of Wilmer.
What
We're
bro-
very
else do you wanna
excited to
know?
have you here. Very excited to have you here.
Welcome, welcome. So did
Thank
you
you.
move into the area, or are you doing that drive?
We will be moving to Waconia.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and I don't know if you guys are aware, but Grant, who
Left
was
too.
our
Mhm.
assistant, left at the end of,
Last week.
His last day was September 1st.
yes.
I got that
Yeah.
email because I emailed him and then
Yeah.
he got that bounce
We
back.
were sad to see him go.
Yeah.
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 So was I.
Okay.
So,
So you're
getting a new
permanent.
person to replace?
I am permanent, yes.
Okay.
not right away.
No.
Because last I heard it was interim that we were looking for, and
You were
Yeah.
stuck with me.
Yeah, we had, the city
Everybody
had
run.
an interim.
We had an interim, Shirley,
Yeah.
okay.
and her last day will be Monday. And then she was going on to another city as an interim. Because by then Jacob will know everything he
wants
needs to know about
about-
Maple Plain.
Maple Plain.
There you go.
We
Well,
were,
no, he probably already knows
By
it.
5 o'clock tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, he'll have it all.
I would add that we were very impressed, and I had the honor of being one of the interview groups to get to know you a little bit, and so welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to see you here.
I'm excited to be here.
It's cool.
Why don't we go around the room, announce ourselves, and say how long we've been living in Maple Plain? Mike.
70 years. No.
Born-
Okay,
born-
he's
born
doing
in
the
You're not that
numbers.
old.
He's doing the numbers. About 30 maybe, something like that. I have to think. 88. How many years is that? It's
40, you're getting close to, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's over 30.
It's over 30.
Mayor or something.
Under 40. But yeah, it's 30.
Nick, I've been here a year in September now, so, yeah, just live right across the street.
Nice.
I'm Stefan Scherson, and I've been Maple Plain for 19 years.
Nice to meet you.
Mardell, here
Mardell.
comes the winner.
Thought that was impressive. Listen to Mardell.
No, actually, I think I tie because I've only lived in Maple Plain since probably, I think it was 87. But then I lived a whole mile north of the water tower for another 25 or 30 years before that. So
Yeah.
that was in Independence.
Oh.
So I've only lived in Maple
Technically.
Plain.
Technically.
But I've considered Maple Plain
Home.
my home,
Yeah.
even if you live in Independence.
Adam Millett, I've been in Maple Plain a little over 4 years now. My wife grew up around here. We moved here after having her adopted.
Wonderful.
Jared, we've been here maybe 2.25 years.
Okay.
Barb Rosen and my husband and our family have been here 31 years now, the end of September.
Wonderful.
So, and our kids went to Orono, they're all grown up now, and so we are empty nesters, so.
Good for you.
Do you want?
Oh, you want me to?
Connie,
Sure,
come
might as
on.
well. I don't know.
Connie Francis, not the singer.
Right, not the singer, I married into the name. I have lived in Maple Plain, in my current house over 20 years, before that in some apartments for a couple years, but in the general area all my life.
Nice.
But I'm not gonna tell you how long that is.
We won't ask her.
Any other business? Well, then I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I make a motion to say goodnight and see you next month.
Can I get a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The meeting is adjourned.